All right, so this is The Necessity and Power of Author Care, presented by Breathing Space Creative and Arsenal Pulp Press, originally intended to be presented in person at Tech Forum 2020, but now brought to you as a video recording. I'm Sanara Geisler. I'm the Director of Marketing and Publicity at Arsenal Pulp Press. We're a leading Canadian independent book publisher, and we operate in Vancouver, BC, on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I've run Arsenal's marketing and publicity program since 2010. Above and beyond my work at Arsenal, I'm a published writer, I'm a performer, and even though I spend most of my days kind of supporting and boosting the work of other artists, I'm very interested in exploring this topic and how care in our industry can exist on both sides of the desk. So that is for authors, but also for professionals who are interested in supporting art and authors across the industry. So that includes festival and literary organizers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shalene to say a bit about herself.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sanara. I'm so excited to share this presentation because author care is at the core of everything that I do. So my name is Shalene Knight, and I am the founder of Breathing Space Creative and Learn Writing Essentials. I am also an author working on book number 3, a novel, and it's very intriguing, and I'm so excited about it. But when I step outside of my author world, I was also the previous festival director for the Growing Room Literary Festival in Vancouver, as well as the previous managing editor for the affiliated magazine. And so this presentation means everything to me because, again, I know what it's like to be an author struggling to find answers, struggling to find support, too afraid or nervous to ask for help. And so hopefully this presentation kind of brings all of these aspects together. We want to share the perspective of the authors, the publishers, the publicists, and hopefully we come to some kind of a beautiful understanding of what author care actually is.
Okay.
So we have quite a few questions that we hope we will be able to answer through this presentation, but I think we also want to reassure publishers that those who work directly with authors, that they are all already doing a lot of this work. So
Yes.
what is author care? Author care means creating and being transparent about added supports for authors by asking what they need. So authors need to be able to write, participate in events, travel, promote their books, and do everything else that kind of contains that whole container of being a writer. So what tools can you provide that will help with tips in terms of navigating social media, utilizing tracked changes, Google Docs, creating bios? How do you prepare your authors for CanLit and beyond? And is this even your job? And how do our own assumptions prevent us from providing care? We think about author care, we often think about things like hotels, swag, perks, and trust me, authors actually care about this stuff and they appreciate it, but I think care kind of goes a little bit deeper than the material things, and that's what we hope to sort of talk about today. So skills and experience come from and are built from someone taking the time to slow down and meet someone where they are at. Why is author care needed? I think this is a really big question. Preparing authors for what the publishing industry looks like is very, very important, and especially because the industry and the landscape is constantly shifting and changing. It's really important to share this growth with the authors. So helping authors to establish realistic goals, that's a big one. Grow via professional development and constantly add to their own toolkits. This will help them not only produce future books with you, but also to establish a long-term career in the arts, which I think is everyone's goal. So the more we ask new authors what their immediate concerns are, the more we can see that a lot of these anxieties can be alleviated by just offering resources and not assuming that everything is okay or that authors come to the table with this knowledge of the industry already. And so just knowing what is expected of them, I think, is also very, very helpful. So most new authors are hesitant about sharing their inexperience with publishers, so they stay in the dark. And Sanara, I think publishers are definitely already infusing care into the work they do. What do you think?
Yeah, so I would say for sure that as publishers, we know that each book is really like its own business, it's its own animal, and it requires a different sort of treatment from editorial to design to marketing to event plans, all of that, it's really when we fall into a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach with how we communicate and talk to authors that I think we can inadvertently set up miscommunication and confusion, even though our intentions and our understanding is that, yes, each book is different, is going to have different needs. So, when we kind of forget that and when we sort of fail to factor that into what we're doing, we can make authors feel as if they don't have agency in their art and there isn't flexibility and we're not actually, listening to them. So care, I think, is really essential in terms of sustainability and consistency for, the author and the publisher, just from the perspective also of retaining authors and staff. So, we know that publishers know that authors are going to receive offers from different publishers after they do a book with us, or even before they choose us for a book. And we know that they might move to other publishers for second and third projects, but ultimately decide to return to a first or second publisher based on the strength of that relationship and on that experience. So, advances matter for sure, reach matters, but authors' relationships with publishers matter, I think, almost as much. And, they're going to choose to work with publishers whose mission and whose team they trust and who they're comfortable with and who they've had a really positive experience with. And the other sort of thing I think about when I think about care is, publishing staff, the retention of staff, but also the health of staff. So there's often a lot of turnover in publishing, in publicity in particular. It's really rare that you'll meet a publicist who's stayed in a role for more than a few years. In that respect, I'm a bit like a unicorn. But I'll get into sort of why, the reason that I continue to be able to do this work. So, publicists and editors are really called to do vital emotional labor. Things like pep talks, talking through feelings, addressing fears. This is all really actually necessary and important to the delivering of books into the world, but we don't always recognize it as necessary and valuable labor that is actually essential to the job. Even, it's happening all the time, but we don't always say like, oh, this is what we're doing, and this is actually an important part of the publishing process. So acknowledging that authors have diverse needs, and that we're all people with feelings and emotions and bad days and good days, is going to prepare, our publishing staff to better support authors. So, we can plan for outside help, resources, professional development, workload that actually factors in time to sort of stop and think, take a breath, provide the care that needs to be needed to complete the next step. So, this, I think, is a thing I keep returning to, like that we need to kind of center the idea that we're all human beings with feelings. We're not art making robots. We're not art promoting robots. And this is actually a real strength of our beautiful community, and it's not a weakness. So that's where I want to leave us there.
So true. And I think a lot of this just has to do with communication, like you said, which leads me to our next question. How do we know what our authors need? I think the easiest way to do that, simple as it may be, is to just ask. So I suggest creating a really in-depth author intake questionnaire using a Google form or some way to sort of store the answers in one spot. And, make sure that this questionnaire asks the questions that you may be assuming. So they may seem obvious, but be sure to either explain publishing specific lingo or ditch it altogether. And here are some examples actually of some of the questions I ask the authors that I'm working with directly. So are you familiar with public lending and access copyright programs? If not, how can I help? And this is a big one because I actually didn't learn anything about this until my second book. So I didn't know that I could have money coming in every year for having my books in the library. Nobody told me that. I didn't ask because I didn't know this program existed. And so little things like this and just kind of picking and feeling and seeing what the authors might be interested in learning about will help you provide these resources, or at least direct the author in the direction that they need to go to get the answers to some of these questions. You can also ask the authors how they communicate best. Another big one, not everybody will respond to your emails in a timely manner. Not everyone is comfortable having virtual meetings. So it's really in your best interest to find out how the author prefers to communicate. You can also ask, what aspects of production are they curious about? That's a big one. We don't really, as authors, we don't get to see what happens to our books once the publisher is holding them. So that maybe 1 year stretch of time is a long time to be in the dark. So just kind of picking and pulling and saying, hey, would you like to know, what the marketing side of things looks like? Or would you like to see what the editor is doing with your manuscript? Whatever it is to offer a little bit of insight into production, I think will definitely benefit the author. And what does added support look like for you? Another really general question, but this might be as simple as something, maybe the author just wants to be constantly in the loop. So every single step that you take, maybe they need to know what's happening. You just never know if you don't ask. So I'll share some examples from when I was a brand new author, sort of floating through the industry aimlessly with my first book. I actually had no idea that I was expected to do a lot of the promo and launch planning myself. And it was pretty overwhelming for me, brand new author, just finally finding my writing community. And I had no clue what it meant to organize an event, let alone an event centered around my own book. So it was very, very stressful for me. I didn't feel like I could actually ask for help because I thought I was supposed to come into this industry with that knowledge already. So it was a really shaky time for me. But obviously since then, tons of event organizing experience. So it was actually good to be thrown into the ring for me, but that might not be the case for all authors. But Sanera, how do you figure out what authors need?
Yeah, and it's really what you're saying is we listen to authors, community members, to our colleagues. So we've had an author kit for a while, but we also think of it as a living document that it needs to continually evolve. And our policies and our resources, we develop these in response to communication with our authors. So I think this sort of taking the action to invite author feedback along the way, to log questions, each person working in each department is like, well, I'm getting a lot of questions about author photos. Maybe we need to develop something to better explain how do you do those? What makes a good author photo? Why are we asking it for it to be a certain way? Just simple things like this. When we keep a tally of these questions that come up, editorial, design, marketing, ideally all those different people who are collaborating to make a book come together will collaborate in basically creating the document of the author kit, because when we work together, we have a sense of kind of what are the common questions that keep coming up? What are the things, that we have been assuming, and then that we learn through interactions with authors that they're like, I don't know what that is, or I don't understand why you need that, right?
Yeah, that's so great. This is all so important. And that whole idea of author photos is a big one too. We don't talk about that, but being in this inner circle of authors, there's a big fear around the author photo and how it should look. And what if you don't have professional glossy photos? And can you use a selfie? And are you still, a real author? All these things kind of floating around. And I think it's just so great to have those conversations and kind of put a lot of those fears to rest, which actually ties in perfectly to our next section, which is common author fears. I've been having a lot of conversation with a diverse selection of authors, so ranging from young authors, established authors, emerging older authors, all kinds of folks, and a lot of the fears are the same. So not having enough sit-down time with the editor or full transparency around what this relationship will look like. And that is massive for me. I think when you are sharing your book, you're handing it over to a publisher or an editor, it's a massive act of trust. I think the least that the publisher or editor can do is say, here's what our relationship could look like. Here's what I am able to offer you in terms of my time. Here's how many revisions or reads I can do of your manuscript. I can offer you a meeting where we can sit down face to face and talk about it. Like that relationship, I think, really needs to be laid out so that the author can feel safe and comfortable in terms of someone else holding their work. Another fear or concern that I've heard is not having support around doing media when the book has traumatic content. So this is something where I think it's essential to kind of outsource and say, okay, well, what supports can we provide for this particular person so that they are able to be out in the world talking about their book in a safe way. Another example is fear of not selling enough books. but what does that even mean? What is there a quota? I don't know. I have no idea. But I think we also have to tie that into setting realistic expectations and just really having that conversation as early as we can. Another fear, realizing they don't fully understand their contract. That's also something I think a lot, maybe, I don't know, I'm going to estimate 90% of brand new authors probably don't understand their contract. And so if the publisher is able to sit down and again, go over a lot of the complex lingo, I think that's really great for the authors. So Snera, do you have any known fears that you could talk about?
Yeah, I think a fear that comes up a lot is the fear that the publisher or the publicist isn't doing anything to support the book, or that that's dropped off, or they're not sure when things are happening. You know, you've talked about this a little bit before, that a lot of the publishing and sales work and things that have to happen before a book comes out, it really isn't front facing, it's all
Mm,
internal. So authors, you know, if things don't happen right away, they're concerned, maybe the books weren't sent out. So just, you know, this sort of not knowing about timelines and the fear that is engendered in people by that, right? Fear that without winning a major award, that the book is going to be dead in the water, that nobody's going to care about it, that it's not going to find readers, and you know, fear that, of course, that all the books are competing against each other, and that if the author
mm.
does or says something wrong, that means like their book is going to lose support with the publisher, is a really, I think, big fear that many authors share. And you know, these are all fears, I think, that absolutely can be allayed and worked through with communication with the publisher.
Yes, communication is everything. But let's look at what we owe each other. Snera, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this one.
Yes, it is my pleasure to. So Arsenal Pulp Press's publisher Brian Lamb, I'm going to quote him. He says, "Work is being entrusted to us, so we have an obligation to step up and care for the work as well as the artist." And our editor, Shira Rose Walensky, sort of broadens that quote to say, we owe each other actually caring about care as a concept
Mm,
and thinking about what that means on the individual level for the individual book and manuscript, but also our larger community of writers and publishers and literary organizers. So, you know, asking questions and modeling the kind of professionalism in our communication with authors and with other community members that we want to see become the standard, I think is really important. So, you know, it's not an example, it's not strictly my job, but when authors are invited to speak or take part in events, I always ask a bunch of follow-up questions before I even send the offer to the author, right? So I'm asking, well, is there a fee? Is there travel support? How long are you looking for this person to read? Can you tell me if you're inviting other people and who these people are? Because it sort of lets organizers
mm,
know who might be new to that work or who have many other considerations that are flying around their brains. They're just trying to put an event together. That, you know, compensation should be a consideration. Being able to share who's going to be part of a lineup. Authors are going to want to know that information so they can make a decision about whether they participate. Just little things like this, I think, you know, I'm not assuming that the organizers don't want to offer that information.
mhm.
You know, it's more than likely that they're trying to get those invitations out, trying to meet their own deadlines, and they're not, you know, always able to think about it from the, you know, we teach each other how to do that thinking,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I think that's so important too. And even if, kind of a side note here, even if, a festival or an organization can't pay an author, just knowing that up front is so helpful, because even if the publisher is digging around and getting that information and then offering that to the author, that is huge. That is so huge, because as an author myself who has had to dig for that info and say, well, you kind of have to dance around that accommodations and numbers and fees and all of that. So when the publisher or publicist can really help with that work, it is massive and it really, really makes a difference. But authors and publishers can burn out. So we owe it to each other to share tools, share experiences, and continue to focus on transparency.
Yeah, so I'm going to hard second that point, that authors and publicists and publishers can burn out. And we do have a tendency in our industry, I think this is improving, but there's kind of been this sort of like brain trust thing within publishers where we treat things like venue lists and media lists
Mm,
as insider information, right? But I've always sort of throughout my career been happy to share lists and knowledge with authors and peers. I mean, it's how I improved as a publicist. I had people willing to share that information with me. And we really, I think, need to make the work easier and not harder if all of us are to thrive. You know, better events and more informed collaboration serves all of us as a community. We don't have to operate out of scarcity, out of secrecy, out of fear. I don't think that serves us. So to return to a point I made earlier, I think we really need to challenge that sort of set in stone, one size fits all policy is the most fair policy. You know, it might seem fair in theory to offer everyone what you think is the same amount of support, but in practice, we know that flexible support based on where the authors identify they need it leads to a much more genial and productive work experience for the author and the publisher. And I think, quite frankly, that experience can make or break the success of the book and how far you're able to take that book with publicity, with events, with everything else. So the other thing I want to kind of focus on for a bit is just rather than hiding industry challenges, I think publishers need to speak frankly to authors and tell them, like, these are the realities, but these are how we work within them, or this is how we're, you know, pushing back on this limitation. So acknowledging that we're always works in progress, we're working to improve, is actually not the same thing as saying our work is bad. It's not dismissing the good work that we do every day. We shouldn't feel shame that we can't do it all, whatever that means. We should feel proud of, you know, doing the most with what we have. So I think a lot about when I transitioned into working in books after working in literary magazines, and I very quickly learned that most internships with publishers were unpaid. I learned that women and non-binary folks and folks of color in publicity, in editorial, were expected to act as personal assistants for authors, for publishers, other overworked admin people. I call this kind of the martyr mom expectation. And it was really status quo. And it was scary because to challenge this, you could be seen as lazy, you could be seen as unappreciative of working in this industry. And so I saw, you know, mentors getting really crushed by unsustainable expectations. And I also saw how that frustration flowed towards me, you know, as an intern, as a new person working in that industry. So I think I've seen really beautiful changes in the industry in the 10 years that I've worked in it. Like the beautiful books that we publish that take us apart and put us back together as different, better people. I think our industry needs to sort of follow the lead of the art that we're supporting. So now we're having conversations on Twitter, through industry surveys, in publishing offices and festival offices about kind of incorporating the ethics of the art that we value, right? So I've just seen a real change in us as an industry, how we think about internships. You know, it takes somebody at the press or at the festival saying, hey, like, if we believe in radical justice concepts and that's what we're programming, how can we justify having an unpaid labor force support this work, right? We are learning that if we want authors to be healthy and productive, we, you know, our editors need to say, well, I can't edit your book in 2 days, so I don't expect you to turn around your edits in 2 days either, right? Like, just actually saying that. So I just want to say, like, breathing space and inclusive community initiatives like Growing Room, like the Festival of Literary Diversity, like Reverb Reading Series, like small presses engaged in community, like we're really leading the way, I think, to create an industry that works as joyfully and beautifully as the work that we're helping put out in the world.
Yes, all of that. I second all of that. But it's so exciting to just hear that and to hear, you know, the names of all of those festivals and the people doing that work. And I think if we continue to have these conversations and we talk about the challenges and we take the challenges and we show them and we give them a face and we give them a name and we say, hey, these are the things that we are struggling with. Chances are you're struggling with them too. Now let's pool our resources and build something beautiful versus constantly restarting. I feel like we're always restarting and trying to rebuild something when there's already bits and pieces and fragments that we can be pulling together. So when I hear you talk about that, Snare, I get very excited. But then we have to think, you know, how do we address our assumptions? Because a lot of these conversations don't take place because we make assumptions, and they're made all the time. We do it. We might not even be thinking about it, but we have to slow down. We have to ask questions so that, you know, we don't cut off communication and add more barriers in front of our authors. So here's a list of some things that we sometimes assume, and these are the areas where we don't usually have conversations with the authors. So assumption number one, all authors know how to use track changes. Business people and working professionals do not need author care. Only first-time authors need this. All authors reply to emails in a timely manner. Email is the best form of communication for everyone. Authors do not need emotional support while on tour. No author would ever back out of an event because of feeling tokenized or unsafe. All authors know how to give interviews in all forms, email, TV, radio, you name it. Authors do not need pep talks. Authors will stay with the same publisher forever. Authors will never feel overwhelmed by CanLit. Authors will never feel tired. Authors are always prepared for panels. Authors can answer all audience questions with ease. All authors know how to self-promote and feel comfortable doing so. All authors use social media and are active on social media. All authors have community. All authors have communication skills. I'm tired even just after saying all of those things. So you can imagine having those assumptions and carrying them around. But Sanera, do you have any assumptions that you want to add?
Yeah, of course, there's the assumption that all authors are able and available and want to tour in person, doing many events. There's also the assumption, that authors can take time off work and pay expenses out of pocket, for example, if the publisher uses a reimbursement model, which many do, right? So with all that has been said, I think it's really important to remember that a really high percentage of these kind of assumptions and barriers are going to be removed and addressed with clear communication. When we list them off, it sounds so long and that these conversations are going to be endless, but they're actually pretty productive and fast conversations when we have them early in the publishing process and when we are able to clearly lay out expectations.
But how do we manage expectations? I think that's another good question. And, in addition to what you talked about in terms of the author kit, and I think you should also update this kit regularly. So knowing that these things can change, from one day to the next, I think it's important to offer, especially first-time authors, at least a 45-minute orientation. And obviously we encourage to have, more meetings if you can. But I think this is really that opportunity to kind of talk about what you do, go over everything, talk about the production deadlines, talk about who's at the press so they can kind of put a name, a face, and a role to the people handling, their work. And then setting this firm relationship will only increase transparency. And I think one thing that's really important to think about too is that once you have that relationship established with your author, they're going to feel comfortable to ask these questions. They're going to be okay if you can't get back to them right away because they know that you're busy. You've had this conversation talking about all the work that you do. So transparency, communication, offering a chance to meet, I think is just invaluable and a huge investment. And Zoom, which we're using right now, is a great online meeting platform. And, it's free for meetings that are under 45 minutes. Anyone can, set up a little account. And I have an online writer studio where I work with writers before they publish. And one of the activities that I have them do is to write out their publisher non-negotiables, AKA, what do they truly want from a publisher? And one student shared a few examples with me and I just loved them. And I thought, these are pretty basic, fairly simple. It was really nice to hear this come from an unpublished author's mouth. And I think it's really important to talk about what these expectations are. So one of them is, I want open communication. I want my manuscript treated as if it was a priority to publish and market. I want to have the publication process explained to me. I want my publisher to care about me and my work. The press should be respected in the community, and I want to feel championed as an artist. So I think all of these are reasonable expectations. What do you think we can do to manage expectations, Sanera?
I think just broadening and adding to the author kit talk, our author handbook actually opens with a list of what we expect from authors and what they can expect from us. So I'll just share a few of them, but we say right off of the hop, you can expect us to communicate with professionalism, care, and sensitivity and in a timely manner. You can expect us to answer your questions about the publishing process without judgment. You can expect us to have your book's best interest at heart. It's always worth stating that, I think. And we also have expectations laid out for the authors. So, they have an opportunity to ask us about these expectations, to talk about it. So we say, we expect you to engage in the publishing process in a spirit of respect, openness, and collaboration. We expect you to meet editorial production and marketing deadlines And if you can't meet these deadlines, we ask you to communicate with us about delays or barriers to meeting them if necessary, and we can work on that together. The other thing I sort of talk about in managing expectations is having those kind of no bad ideas and brainstorming conversations. So, we can make space to have these big dream conversations because, what is the arts and, arts business? What is the business of show if not a big dream business, right? And we can acknowledge, like, yes, we would love for you to get into a lot of festivals. We would love for you to be on this like primetime TV show. We would love for you to receive many awards. And then we can talk about, well, what can we do actually as your publisher? And what can you do as an author to work towards these goals? Like, these might not be overnight goals, and they may not happen for your first book, but we can break it down into actual steps, and we can sort of see like what is possible now, what will set you up for this sort of future that you're dreaming of. So publishers can, we can facilitate dreams of winning awards by actually cultivating time and trust into the editing of a book, the developmental editing of the book, ensuring that, we're helping you meet those deadlines so the books are available to submit to awards. Like, those are very key steps. So, we can't infiltrate the awards juries. We can't choose them. We can't force people to love a book, but we can put in this real measurable effort to make sure that the book that they're seeing is the best book it can be, right? And then I always think about authors who dream of performing, like authors who are like, I want to go on Ellen. I want to read in a stadium. Like, this is what I want. I want to be like the Slavoj Žižek of authors, whatever. We can work on performance. Maybe you don't have a ton of performance experience yet. Maybe to get on that festival stage, you need a B-roll. You need examples of how you are on stage, so we can connect you with open mics and with local reading series. Maybe within our own arts community, we know performing coaches, we know people, who can help you develop those skills, or who are authors who tour for a living and give workshops on how to begin sort of building that repertoire. So again, maybe we can't immediately get you on Seth Meyers, but we can talk about, like, that's a great dream to have, and here's how we can help you start to achieve it, right?
I love it. See, this is why I love Arsenal. You're all so amazing. It's so great to think about too, because as an author myself, another side note here, I'm not a performer. I love participating in festivals. I love reading. I love just reading my work, and I love being on panels, but I'll never really be able to perform. I'm always going to be that weird, awkward, introverted person. And so that's just me. But knowing that there are opportunities to have support and grow that as, an additional talent, like, I think that's so fantastic, and just offering that to authors, that's huge. So what can we realistically offer authors, and how do we do it? So I think we're often afraid, as an author, I can say, we are often afraid to ask questions because we don't want to rock the boat. I kind of consider myself to be lucky that somebody said yes to something that I wrote, and I don't want to annoy them. That's just being honest, and that's just being real. But if that conversation is started early, and that relationship is built, and there is trust, and the lines of communication are open, I've said it so many times, and I'll say it again, that will alleviate so much of that stress from the author. So what do you offer authors at Arsenal, Suneera?
Yeah, so there's a few things we can do. We can have, in-person meetings if authors are local or if they're coming to town. We can offer video and phone meetings during the publishing process, and not just one. So meetings all along the way. So usually there is a sort of initial meeting where you sign your contract. There might be follow-up phone calls to that. There's definitely, a one-on-one call or some kind of meeting with our editor where she'll talk to you about timelines. Same thing for the cover. Our designer, Jazz Welch, who's super talented, has a great explainer for, like, here's how many iterations I might do. Here's how much input you're going to get to give. Here's how that's going to work. So, just kind of having these opportunities to building in that time ahead of editorial, design, and marketing, providing resources ahead of these meetings, so maybe hot sheets or explainers, so the authors can come into the meeting feeling like, okay, I've got the basics, but I've got some more questions that flow from there. All of that is, I think, really makes a difference in that relationship, and really makes a difference too with the quality of work everybody can do.
Mhm.
And I was going to say, I like to quote poet, writer Jonathan Ball, who's also a reviewer. He has a very great tweet, and I'm paraphrasing it, but the gist of the tweet is that publishers don't promote books, but they help create conditions where artists can promote and sell their art. So Jonathan sees that as the role of the publisher. And I think what he's really saying there is that publishers don't control everything that makes a book a success. Neither do writers, really, but they can be clear with authors about what they can offer towards, aiming towards success. So clear in terms of what their budget is, but also in terms of time and resource. So they can be clear about what the publisher is responsible for. So an example of that is maybe they're creating materials for you to share online to promote the book or to promote an event that you're doing. And then what the author is responsible for is perhaps sharing those materials on platforms at such and such a time. So just indicating any place that there can be flexibility too. So, if authors let us know, like, I really am nervous about organizing events. I know that you in your marketing kit outline that that's something you love that authors can do if they're able. I feel way more comfortable working on this. Like, I'm a great designer and I want to create my own materials. So if you're doing that, I think it makes total sense for the publisher to be like, sure, we can shift some of our energy towards helping plan events since that's something you really need. So there can just really be that room for discussion. And through that, we also learn maybe more about people's skills and passions than we might learn in the author kit too, right? Because there isn't always an opportunity for authors to offer some of that information that comes out of conversation. So Arsenal has two main author onboarding documents. We have a questionnaire where we ask authors for information, and we have a handbook, the author kit, which is meant to be consulted throughout the publishing process. It's a robust document. Our author handbook, which again we recently revised with really great input from Shalene at Breathing Space. It covers editorial, it covers design, it covers marketing. It gives authors an overview of what it's like to move through the entire book publishing process. It has appendices on funding, on tours and travel, on honorariums, event planning, preparing for media. It's very, very loaded with information. And it even has advice for how to interact with media and how to handle, a bad Goodreads review, all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to publicity, I really try to be honest and hopeful. I want authors to know, how many advanced reading copies or galleys we're going to do. I want them to have the opportunity to give input and where they want those galleys sent. So if they're like, I really want a review in this magazine, or I've worked with an editor at such and such a place before and I think they champion the book, I want the author to feel that they can give me that information and that I'll take it seriously because it's very helpful when we work together. The other thing I think we can really realistically offer authors is the benefit of our experience, just in terms of where to focus efforts. So, when an author comes to us and says, like, I'm a debut author, I want to do a 10-city tour, I'm super energetic, we can say, like, okay, that's great that you want to tour so much and we want to support that, but 10 back-to-back days traveling across the country without a break, I don't know if that's sustainable. Like, let's talk about what a more sustainable pace of touring might look like, right? Because I think, like, our excitement eyes are often bigger than what our body can actually do. So that's something that publishers can weigh in on too. And the other thing I always like to talk about is that we can't actually prevent some failures or disappointments, and we can't expect to. But, we have a say in how we frame our efforts and how we talk about what we're doing, to be clear. So, we might want to do an event and we can say, well, what do we expect from doing an event? Well, we expect a performance opportunity. We expect a chance for the community to gather and to celebrate this author, the community of people who know and love this author and who have contributed to this work, to honor the publication of this book. And that's a much more realistic goal than, say, a publisher or an author thinking, we're going to get 100 strangers to show up and this event's going to make me famous, right? Like, that's a great dream, but it's not a realistic goal. And we can be clear about why we want reviews. So I think sometimes authors think everyone has to love my book and think it's flawless for it to find readers. That's what reviews have to do. And if a review doesn't do that, like, it's terrible, it's the end of the world, I'm in trouble. But really, reviews are a way for books to read, for people who already follow book discourse, who love books, to learn that a new book exists. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing when the books are reviewed well, when it's a glowing review and the reviewer loved it. But we can assume that readers who are interested in books disagree with reviewers all the time. And they find a book based on topic, based on, even a sentence in the review. Even if the review is negative, they think, oh, this is a book I want to read because, it's about two sisters who travel the world or whatever, right? So I think that's there's much more grounded ways to think about why we do things. And we only kind of realize this when we have this open communication and we talk about the why and the what, right?
Yes, all of that. Even just as an author, hearing you say all of this, I can feel all the stress melt away. And I'm thinking, where was Sonero 7 years ago when I needed to hear this? But I think, it's an important conversation to have, and we can easily, rid some of that author disappointment by just talking about these things. I know, I hear some of the conversations where authors are thinking, oh yeah, once my book is out, I can't wait to just sit home and only write and live off my royalties. And, there's all of these really just unrealistic expectations. And I think it's just easy enough to just have these conversations, and you can still dream big, but knowing that, you don't have to do everything with that first book. So I wonder, can we talk a little bit too about the author publisher relationship and what that looks like?
Yes, we always want to ensure that that relationship is cooperative instead of adversarial. Like, my biggest sort of thing that I always want to avoid is in one bar, there's a group of authors talking about how terrible publishers are. In another bar, there's a group of publishers being like, we love this industry without the authors. Like, we don't want that. We need each other. It's a collaborative relationship. We absolutely depend on each other to do what we need to do and to have beautiful books in the world. So actual collaboration in the publishing process. So we need to treat our authors as creative partners, plain and simple, right? So valuing the input of authors by considering their voice, their aesthetic, their values when we are bringing these books to market. So Arsenal really does our best to understand that there is a power differential between us and our writers. So we're a small press, and even small presses, I think it's easy to think like, oh, we're all on equal footing, but that's not exactly true, right? So we try to remember that authors are people, they're our partners. They're not commodities. That's not how we think about people. So this applies to editorial and to design and marketing. We really make an effort that our authors get a say in it. So even if it's just to sign off on it before we, send out a press release about your book to the world and make sure that there isn't a big error in how we've described your identity or your book, that's huge. And that's not always something that publishers remember to offer, kind of in the sprint to make sure the information's getting out there. So that's one way I think we can be really collaborative, and we can be really clear, I think, and transparent about why we ask for what we ask for. So why do we need this information? Why do you have to fill out these long forms? Who is it shared with? Why are these various deadlines that seem really early and unforgiving? Like, why are these in place? Why do we have to meet these deadlines to ensure that the book has the best chance to reach readers out in the world? So things like some of the marketing deadlines are almost a full year or more ahead of when the book comes out. And so just sharing with authors, like, we are going to use this thing that you fill out to talk to our sales reps about your book. So this is why we need you to take some care with it, because we're going to be talking about your book before it really even exists as an edited manuscript. So that's why we're asking for this, right? The other really big thing I always like to point to is letting authors know that no is a normal thing to say, that they can say no and they're going to be okay and their book is okay and everybody's okay. So, I once worked as a personal assistant for a novelist who told me, like, the most important thing I needed to learn if I was going to work in the arts was to say no enough to learn what saying yes actually felt like. So I think in publishing, and I've talked about this before, we get into scarcity thinking. We think that we have to pursue every and all opportunity. We have to think we can't ask follow-up questions. We can really normalize overworking and encourage everybody to do that and to overextend themselves. And that really, we know, doesn't serve us in the long run. So, we can make it clear that questions and declining things are actually a regular part of working as an author and a publisher. Publishers just decline manuscripts all the time, right? If the manuscript isn't ready or the author needs to spend time with it or it's just not the right fit for them. And similarly, like, authors can decline offers from publishers. Authors can decline to participate in events that don't sound like a good fit for them. And if we think an opportunity as a publisher is a really important opportunity for sales, we can let the author know that. We can say, hey, we really suggest you publish or you participate in this event. But if we don't offer any kind of feedback. If we just sort of throw event invitations at authors without saying, hey, we have experience with this and we think it's good, how's the author going to know, right? Like how are, we need to sort of be able to offer that information to each other. And the flip side is that we need authors to tell us, if they've had a negative experience somewhere or they have concerns about an event, I absolutely want to know that. I'm not going to see that as a reflection on the author. I'm going to see that as like vital information to help support this author, find opportunities that will work. And we also need, authors to know that we need them to communicate with us. So, life is full of big upsets, and, we're all human beings. We all encounter challenges and struggle, and we have bad days, and we have personal tragedy, and we have everything else. So we need authors to be able to know that they can let us know without disclosing in a whole bunch of details if they're not available, if it's a bad time. We just don't want them to go radio silent on us, because we want to be able to plan and support them through that. So, authors should not think, I always say, just that declining an interview or declining an opportunity means that no more opportunities will come. And I really think that that's absolutely scarcity thinking. It's like, the more I say yes to, the more there will be. But I've been in this industry long enough to tell you that, there are people who say no to everything, and the opportunities and the invitations still come, right? Like we've built such a vibrant, rich community full of so many different endeavors that there really is a lot of opportunity, and there are different opportunities for each author. So I want authors to know, and I think publishers should let authors know, that it's not going to affect publishers' commitment to supporting the book to hear from the author about things they want to do versus things they're not able to do. That's actually valuable information that we really need.
Yeah, I would love to have all of that on a t-shirt and just walk around with it, because I think it's so important and it's so huge. And I'm guilty of a lot of that too, where I said yes to so many things that I just didn't want to do because I thought I had to do it and I didn't want to disappoint anyone. But as soon as you learn that power of no, all of a sudden you have this much more energy, to put towards your creatives. So yeah, I love that. I agree with all of that. And the good thing is there's so much we can do right now for our authors. So at Breathing Space, we like to create a lot of quick and dirty free resources. And so these are just things that folks can just, come to our website and just quickly download. And it's something that we're going to constantly add to and constantly update. So, tangible tools that you can give your authors now. So we have a grant guide, and we commissioned a grant specialist to write this grant guide for us. We have a quick and dirty self-promo tip sheet, quick and dirty organizing your own launch tip sheet, quick and dirty talking to the media tip sheet. And these are not in-depth, documents. They're just some quick and dirty things that any author can kind of implement into their author toolkit. We also have an in-depth author onboarding kit. So there's all kinds of cool stuff. And I mean, I think if we're able to create these resources for authors and make it available, it also opens up, again, communication, which is what we really want.
Yes. And then just adding to sort of the list that you've given us of tools, a thing I found really helpful with our authors that I've done multiple times is just sharing event planning spreadsheets and tour planning and what that looks like. Sometimes I've even shared this across publishers. So when you have a book, when you maybe have an author who's got a book coming out with multiple publishers, this does happen. You can even just amongst those two publishers share a Google document. And so we can see the speed that events are booked at, how things change, the back and forth. And that also really models for authors who maybe want to set up their own events, how to do that. Like, what are the practices around that? What are the timelines like? Just being able to see that. And again, sort of just one little final example about possibility. It's like, you may have an author who's just like, I wrote this like sort of cottage themed novel, and what I really want for this novel is to have a huge regatta. I want this like water party. I want a boat race. And the publisher can be like, well, I can't actually organize a dragon boat race for your book. That's not possible. But like, how can we each talk to each other, you and me, about how to capture the spirit of such of the event that you want? Like, maybe we do a little outdoor launch and it's at a location where boats are visible, whatever. It's a really small example, but just sort of like having that creative space between author and publisher, and being able to have those sort of like, no, but what if conversations, right? Yeah, that's where I really hope, like to leave things, is not that, like, you know, it's not dream crushing to have boundaries.
Yeah.
I actually think it's planting the seeds of how to sort of achieve
Yes.
these big things that we really want.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I love landing on a note just like that. And I think this has been so awesome. I love sharing all of this. I love talking about author care, and it's been so great to do this with you, Sanera. And I think if anyone has any questions, it's too bad we couldn't all be having a discussion right now in person, but you can get in touch with myself at Breathing Space or Sanera at Arsenal. And yeah, so we'll just leave it there. And author care, I love it. I'm all about it.
Thanks so much, Shalene. It's so great to get to do this with you. And I just, on a little final note, want to say that in these sort of uncertain times that we're in right now, I'm especially thrilled to be having Breathing Space support for our authors, because it really is unprecedented. And I think, if anything, it just underscores the need to have these supports in place, right? Because we just don't know what life is going to throw at us. So this is the value of care, for sure.
Yes, and we can't do this work alone, so it's so great to collaborate. Thank you so much, Sanera.
Thank you, Shalene. I'm going to applaud for you.
And for you.